President Donald Trump has called for immediate negotiations to discuss the acquisition of Greenland and revealed that he won't use military force to achieve that goal. Speaking at the World Economic Forum, currently underway in Davos in Switzerland, President Trump argued that a US takeover of the island nation would greatly enhance the NATO alliance. Now, the US president weaved between domestic and global issues, and at one point confirmed his view of a stolen election in 2020, which he lost to Joe Biden, telling his audience that people would be prosecuted soon. He also had choice words for NATO and Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who spoke in the same plenary a day earlier. Sherwin Bryce-Pease picks up the story for us from New York.
President Trump arrived in the Swiss Alps several hours delayed due to an electrical issue on Air Force One, which forced his return to Joint Base Andrews in Maryland to change planes. As the Greenland issue quickly became a key talking point in his Davos speech, as he seemed to give a plug to colonialism.
It's the United States alone that can protect this giant mass of land, this giant piece of ice, develop it and improve it and make it so that it's good for Europe and safe for Europe and good for us. And that's the reason I'm seeking immediate negotiations to once again discuss the acquisition of Greenland by the United States, just as we have acquired many other territories throughout our history, as many of the European nations have. They've acquired, there's nothing wrong with it. Many of them, some went in reverse, actually, if you look. Some had great, vast wealth, great vast lands all over the world. They went in reverse. They're stuck back where they started. That happens too. But some grow.
He accused NATO of treating the United States very badly, and that his efforts to acquire Greenland would greatly enhance the alliance. Despite vehement opposition to the move that has seen the European Parliament suspend work on the EU's trade deal with the United States, including over Trump's threats of tariffs against countries that oppose his stance.
We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland. They have a choice. You can say yes, and we will be very appreciative, or you can say no, and we will remember.
President Trump railed against immigration policies in Europe, arguing that certain places had become unrecognizable and that the region was heading in the wrong direction. He attacked climate policies as perhaps the greatest hoax in history and took a dig at Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, who a day earlier spoke about how a rupture in global relations had seen the US-led international order begin to fade, advocating for a new values-based realism among the middle powers of the world. That didn't go down well with the US leader.
Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
He also told his audience that were it not for the United States in World War II, Europe would be speaking German and a little Japanese.
We believe deeply in the bonds we share with Europe as a civilization. I want to see it do great. That's why issues like energy, trade, immigration, and economic growth must be central concerns to anyone who wants to see a strong and united West, because Europe and those countries have to do their thing. They have to get out of the culture that they've created over the last 10 years. It's horrible what they're doing to themselves. They're destroying themselves. These beautiful, beautiful places.
Also suggesting that the war in Ukraine would not have started had the presidential election in 2020, which he lost to Joe Biden, not been rigged, a position not supported by any credible evidence, the FBI, the Department of Justice, or the courts.
It's a war that should have never started, and it wouldn't have started if the 2020 U.S. presidential election weren't rigged. It was a rigged election. Everybody now knows that. They found out. People will soon be prosecuted for what they did. It's probably breaking news, but it should be. It was a rigged election. Can't have rigged elections. You need strong borders, strong elections, and ideally a good press.
President Trump expected to host a signing ceremony for his Board of Peace in Davos on Thursday. I'm Sherman Bryce-Pease in New York.
Yes, indeed. You've been listening to Sherman Bryce-Pease unpack US President Donald Trump's striking appearance at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where he called for negotiations over US control of Greenland, defended tariffs as a tool of power, questioned Europe's economic and political direction, and dismissed global climate and renewable energy efforts. But I guess beyond the headlines, these remarks do raise deeper questions about the future of global security, trade and alliances, and what all of this means for regions like ours, Africa, increasingly caught between major powers competing for influence, resources, and strategic partnerships. Well, to help us make sense of the global and African implications, we're now joined by Dr. Terence McNamee, who's a senior fellow at the Montreal Institute for Global Security. Dr. McNamee, thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, Peter.
So I'm going to start by just getting your take on this. I mean, we now know Donald Trump, but if you heard him for the first time ever and you were told this is the US president speaking, I would be gobsmacked. What's your take on what you heard?
Well, I think you framed it perfectly there, because it's not the first time that we have heard this. So, in fact, it was pretty much as expected. There was really nothing new in that speech. It was a kind of greatest hits of all of his accomplishments, how hot the American economy is doing. He was reaffirming the idea of America first. It's a nationalist world. It's not a globalist world. And so there was nothing really new in there. It was actually quite a tedious speech. It was bereft of the kind of fireworks that we've come to expect from him. So yeah, of course, we could say it was cringeworthy, embarrassing. It was full of misleading statements and lies, frankly, but pretty much sort of par for the course. But I think the main takeaway is the fact that he went in there to force the Greenland issue, and effectively he didn't get what he wanted.
So let's talk about this Greenland story. What's at the heart of this? Is this genuine strategy? Is this global security? What is he trying to do with the Greenland story?
Well, my own view is that it is largely based on personality and psychology. It has very little to do with security, both of NATO or the United States, and nor does it really have to do with rare earths and critical minerals. I think it has more to do with Trump's own visions of grandiosity, enlarging the United States, enlarging the sense of himself and his contribution and legacy. Of course, there's elements of security, and of course, there's elements of the rare earths and minerals. But I think because if you break it down in terms of what the United States already has in terms of access to Greenland, it can do effectively anything that it wants with Denmark and Greenland's cooperation in the security and the minerals field. So I think we have to, unfortunately, look to other explanations as the principal drivers of his behavior over Greenland. But there's no doubt about it that he made a call about Greenland, and he thought it was going to serve as a bit of a wedge between NATO and Europe. But what he encountered was a very united front. And I think everyone is now kind of looking for an off-ramp for him and hope this issue just sort of dies.
So I guess he's at times testing how far he could go, because he talked about putting an army on the ground there, and now he's talking about discussions. Is he starting to get a reality check in terms of what he can get away with in terms of his ambitions? I mean, he went into Venezuela, he got away with that, but he can't keep on just waking up and saying, let's do that. I guess he's getting some feedback.
Yeah, so it's a good point. So I think he was very much emboldened by what they were able to achieve in Venezuela. And I think he was riding high after that. I think he was probably close to doing something in Iran. Why he has turned back in terms of, pushing the regime over the edge with airstrikes and so forth, I'm not sure. But yeah, I think Venezuela is a really important point. I mean, I think that that demonstrated a kind of surgical, execution of a kind of Monroe Doctrine that a lot of people have been talking about in terms of President Trump. But on Greenland, I think what may be the off-ramp is that we're going to see some agreement by which very small bits of Greenland territory will be ceded over to the United States uh, in terms of bases. So if we think about the United Kingdom and Cyprus, or even the United States and Guantanamo Bay, that I think is a possibility where there could be more US bases. And in that very, very specific area, it could have autonomy. But yeah, I think he's going to move on. We'll move on after Greenland because he's realizing that this is economically, strategically. There's also no support within the United States for his behavior over Greenland. So I suspect that this issue at some point is going to die away, but he'll also spin it into some kind of victory.
And what was in it that we should have paid attention to as the continent? I guess we are reliant on both Europe and the US, and if these two are at loggerheads, we're caught in the middle, aren't we? What did we as a continent take out of the speech?
Well, there certainly wasn't anything in there relevant to Africa directly. Um, again, it's a really interesting question because there's the South Africa issue, which I think is somewhat separate from things in the rest of the continent. Uh, but largely, I think it reflects is kind of fundamental disinterest. There's a lack of interest in terms of the African continent. Um, I don't think he's in his team is quite certain where Africa fits in terms of the sort of spheres of influence model of the world that a lot of people are talking about. So, in other words, the United States controls, Latin America, North America, the sort of Western Hemisphere. China will be able to control the Far East, and then kind of Russia and India over there. Where exactly Africa fits into this equation, I'm not sure. Again, I don't think there's really an appetite to do anything significant. We saw over Nigeria, but again, that seems fairly limited. I would expect at some point the pressure is going to return to South Africa. And I don't see that issue getting any better in the near term. And I think that these exercises in Simonstown are going to be raised at some point in the near future as a pretext for further punishing South Africa.
Dr. Terence McNamee, always great talking to you. Your insights greatly appreciated. Thanks so much for your time.
Good to be with you.
That was Dr. Terence McNamee from the Montreal Institute for Global Security, helping us unpack President Trump's remarks at Davos from Greenland, NATO, Europe, Canada, trade and energy.